quick introductions, and then we will be putting up a chat to get to know you a little bit more. I'm Jacques Lacour. Been in adult ed for a long time. Started as a teacher, became a coordinator, administrator, and spent a lot of time in professional learning, which I am still doing, and that is my absolute passion. And a great part of my job is being able to work with my friend and colleague, Sue Pong.
Hi there, I'm Sue, and you may remember me from Oakland Adult and Career Education and the Family Literacy Program. And I'm happy to see some, I don't want to say old colleagues, but familiar colleagues and some new ones. So I'm glad that you're all here today.
All right, let's see. Sue, my keyboard shortcut isn't working, so let's just go straight to the poll here. Vicki, if you wouldn't mind putting the poll up. Thanks. So we just want to get a sense of who you are and why you're here. So you see this is a two-part poll. You can use that bar on the right to scroll down to answer question number 2 after you've answered question number 1. And like I said, we just want to get a sense of who's showing up and why. So we'll know a little bit about who you are and might be able to tailor some of what we say to meet your needs. So it looks like administrators, teachers, a couple of folks in other. If you're in other, yeah, could you please say in the chat what your other role is? We'd appreciate knowing what that is. Motivations for being here. Looks like we've got half of us coaching now and wanting to improve skills. Let's see, want to incorporate coaching into the program. If you want to become a coach, and a couple want to be coached. And I love the just curious. That's something that we really appreciate and is a huge part of what makes coaching work, being curious. So that's really great. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see. Okay. All right, so let's see. I'm having a little technical trouble here, getting back to the slideshow. All right. Okay,
so you just shared your motivations of why you came here today, and we'd like to share ours. Well, both Jacques and I have done some informal coaching in the past. We've been fortunate to recently do some coaching on a more formal basis in adult education. We've learned a lot along the way, and we'd like to share our enthusiasm for coaching with you today. Also, coaching has increasingly become an integral part of professional learning in California adult ed. For example, coaching is being integrated into existing professional learning institutes. We'd like to advocate for some common definitions and best practices toward becoming better prepared and more consistent in providing quality coaching in adult ed. Toward this effort, we've already seen, we're beginning to see coaching colleagues forming study groups and learning together. Jacques, would you like to add anything regarding why you and I are here today?
Yeah, just that as we learn more and more about effective coaching ourselves, and as we practice coaching more as individuals and as coaching partners, I've really been constantly struck by how how many substantial and essential moving parts there are to the whole coaching endeavor. I'm constantly recognizing the huge difference between what I thought coaching was about a year ago and what I think it is now. And I hope that by sharing some of the information we'll be offering today, we can help colleagues in the field increase effectiveness. It's really crucial to get off to a good start when you begin a coaching cycle. And as we've found out from our experience, you don't have to learn everything at once, but it makes a difference to have a good foundation to get started with. And that's the foundation that we're hoping to begin to provide a little bit with the Coaching Conversations webinar. Sue, could you share why that title was chosen, Coaching Conversations?
I'm glad you asked. This is the first webinar in a series of 2 titled Coaching Conversations. And we chose this title for a couple of reasons. One is that we see the coaching process as conversations, growth-focused dialogues between the coach and the client. Another reason for this title, Coaching Conversations, is that the format of this webinar is conversation between Jacques and myself, and conversation with you, the participants. And toward promoting coaching conversations this afternoon, we welcome all your questions. So please ask them in the chat, and we'll either address the question at the time or circle back to it later. And I'd like to thank Katie Naginski and Vicki Swindell for their help in monitoring the chat for your questions and comments, and for their support in this webinar. So our objectives today, in front for you for this afternoon, is that you will be able to describe the potential power of coaching in adult education, to identify evidence-based foundations of excellent coaching practices, and define different types of coaching approaches and relate them to your experiences and roles in adult education. And here's the agenda and the flow of topics this afternoon. The overview will include how coaching fits into the professional learning context. And in research, we'll hear about coaching teachers, coaching leaders, coaching teams. We'll talk about what is coaching and types of coaching, including different approaches, different relationships, and a quick overview of a coaching process. And in the wrap-up, we'll include resources. So we hope that you can stay with us to the end and get some of those resources. Jacques, you've had decades of working in professional learning and digging into the research. What's the context for coaching?
Well, we're going to get into the research in just a bit, but let's think about the big picture of professional learning first, so we can see exactly where and how coaching fits in. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We'll go through it pretty quickly so we can get to the substance of today. This is just for setting the context a bit. So we'd like to activate your thinking about this a little bit in the chat. Would you please respond to this question? Please share what you know about what really works in professional learning, and to clarify that a little bit. When we say what really works, we mean what is really effective in terms of producing tangible results for students, for student learning, and for teachers, for teacher learning too. Think about some of the experiences that you've had in professional development or professional learning, and share a characteristic or an element or two that you think was really critical to its success in the chat, please. Carol's mentioning communities of practice. Absolutely. Diana, setting clear goals. Yeah, really important to know where you're going. Peer-to-peer sharing of successes. Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, that's really good.
An application.
Yeah. Oh, there's
From Beth
Beth. I
Cutter.
missed that one. Yeah.
It's okay.
Application. Yes, absolutely. Really being meaningful in the moment for the students that you are working with in the moment. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I've listed here some of the things that research over the years has identified as really necessary elements for great professional learning experiences. These are the most commonly cited characteristics. Some of them are exactly what you have said in the chat here. There's a lot of overlap there. And you see that the very last bullet on the right says coaching, feedback, and reflection. So coaching is in there in a way that fits in like it's the glue that holds all of these other pieces together. Coaching helps keep the work job embedded, and it helps keep the focus on learning by doing through implementation and reflection. It really helps keep the continuous improvement mindset of the school front and center. And in good coaching, the use of data is critically important as well. So coaching helps sustain professional learning over time and really ensures that the use of constructive and productive feedback is a part of the process. So when you add it all up, it really increases the capacity for effective collaboration and the skills necessary to do that. Coaching really just makes all of the other things sustain and come to life more easily. So when I was doing a little bit of the research preparing for this, I ran across a few statements about coaching, and I kind of mashed them all up into this one because it seemed to really sum it up well. And it's really about coaching filling the gap between a lot of those different elements and characteristics of effective professional development. So if we think, I'm going to go back a second here. If we think that coaching is critically important, then it seems like we should be sure that we are coaching as skillfully and as effectively as possible. We want coaching to be a strength of the process, of the overall process, and based on evidence and best practice. We don't want coaching to be absent or a weak link in the process.
And I'd like to add something here that we are certainly getting support at the state level. As we mentioned earlier, adult education in California is integrating coaching into existing training and institutes as part of the professional learning package. And we appreciate this investment in coaching and the belief that coaching provides added value, resulting, of course, in improved student outcomes, learning and outcomes.
Thanks, Sue. So let's take just a quick look at the research to make sure that we're on solid ground here. If we're going to invest time and energy in coaching to help individuals and organizations improve, let's make sure we're doing it from a good starting point. So is there any evidence to prove, to show that it works, or at least that it has promise? We're going to take a pretty quick look now. An overview of the research will actually make you a little confused, because some research says that coaching does work really well, and other research isn't so sold on it. That really confused me when I first started digging into it. But then what I discovered was that the research that says coaching does work is almost always research involving trained and skilled coaches who are working in well-organized coaching environments and in a good culture for coaching. And the research that isn't so sure about the effectiveness of coaching is almost always conducted in situations where the coaches have not had much training at all, and the coaching environment that they're working in is not really conducive to coaching. It's poorly structured or not structured, and there's no support for the coaching effort to stand on to succeed.
So it sounds like there's a case to be made for training and professional learning for coaches, like today's webinar.
Yes, we hope that's the case, absolutely. All right, so I'm just going to show a few quick slides here with some of the statements about different types of coaching. Here's some promising data from research on instructional coaching. Pretty good and persuasive statement there about the measured difference in effectiveness for teachers who have been coached well. And that is taken from 60 different studies. So that kind of metadata has a really nice feel to it. And here is a statement about some leadership coaching. The leadership coaching literature is kind of just starting to really become available as well, but the pattern is the same. If the coaching is done with skill and structure and support, it can be very, very effective. To me, the let's see, the research on coaching teams is really what's kind of most exciting here. The emerging evidence is really encouraging, and it makes me think that perhaps what we should be paying most attention to, as we'll touch on a little bit later in this webinar, is coaching teams. This slide is a little fuzzy. Sorry about that. It looks about as old as this research is. You can see it's from 1982. But that is the seminal research on which a lot of follow-up research was done and is still being done, with that really impressive number at the bottom that shows that transfer of skill, the actual implementation and application of skills that are learned, really happens when coaching is in the picture, and it really doesn't happen when coaching is not in the picture. So I think the best general conclusion for the moment is to say that coaching, when it's practiced effectively, can have a real impact. And it certainly has great potential given the amount of attention it's getting in the increasingly available supports for learning how to coach effectively.
So this research on coaching is certainly validating and encouraging. Jacques, in your professional wisdom, can you share an instance where coaching made a difference in adult ed?
I have a memory of back when I was at Mount Diablo Adult Education in Concord in the ESL department. A bunch of us went to a CATISOL conference, and when we came back, I said, hey, if anybody wants me to come into your classroom and observe your efforts to implement something that you learned at CATISOL. I'm happy to do that and give you some feedback. And a colleague took me up on that offer. We met before I went in to observe her lesson. She described the technique that she learned to me. She showed it how it fit into her lesson plan. And I asked her, exactly what kind of feedback she wanted me to give so I would know exactly what to look for. She gave me some guidance there. I went in to observe the lesson. And then we met afterwards, and I gave her my observations. We talked about what went according to her expectations and what didn't. And then she said, I really like this technique. I'm going to practice it some more. Will you come back and do the same thing in a couple of weeks when I've done it a few more times? And I said, sure. And when I went back the next time, it seemed absolutely second nature to her already. She had really worked on it and perfected it between the first time I observed and the second time I observed. And she said that, a part of the reason for her being able to make the improvements was based on the feedback that she had asked me to give, based on the observations she asked me to focus on. So that's just a very simple example, but it's pretty powerful too. And I think it shows how coaching can really be effective.
It's certainly a good example of bridging between learning and doing. Learning a strategy at a CATISOL conference and doing it in the classroom. I can imagine that without coaching, that strategy might have remained on the handout. Thank you for that example. Before we go on to what is coaching, I'm looking to see in the chat if there are any questions. I don't see any. Vicki or Katie, do you see any?
No.
I take that as a no.
No, I don't see any questions.
I haven't noticed any, but I do want to acknowledge Julie's contribution to the brainstorm about what makes for good professional learning. All of those things that Julie listed are incredibly important and definitely part of the package.
I especially like student-centered.
Yeah.
A good reminder. All right, so what is coaching? As Jacques has just shared from his research, coaching can be defined, practiced, and experienced differently across institutions. Part of our motivation for this webinar series is to start conversations about what coaching is in adult ed. So what is coaching? And just as importantly, what is it not? There are certainly a variety of coaching situations, with coaching with teachers, with leaders, with teams. And coaching can mean different things to different people. So starting now, here I'm going to begin using a term, coaching partners, to mean both coaches and those being coached or the client. So what I want to say is that I think it's helpful for both coaching partners to clarify and agree on their expectations of the coaching process and of expected outcomes. It's also important for the sponsoring organization to have a clear vision for the coaching program. Here's an example of where defining coaching and clarity of expectations was helpful. I was coaching an administrator, and we had clarified that our coaching time was to focus on the partner's identified areas of professional growth. Then I was asked to share some institutional knowledge and history. I realized that that was outside of our stated coaching focus. So I offered to have a separate non-coaching session to address institutional knowledge. This not only kept the coaching session focused on the partner's own growth, but it allowed me to assume an expert role when addressing institutional knowledge, as opposed to a facilitative role as a coach. And we'll talk more about a facilitative role later today. But this clarity of expectations is particularly important when the coach can play multiple roles in an organization, including being a supervisor. The next bullet, sometimes coaches work together as a team within the same or similar programs, and I'll call these coaching teams community of practice. It's important for all those within the same community of practice to clarify and agree on what coaching is. Once having a common definition of coaching, the community of practice can then become more consistent in their practices within the coaching program. And there is a foundation for peer learning and support. Jacques, you and I are part of a community of practice. Can you tell us about being a part of that and how clarifying the coaching role has been foundational?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. We're part of a couple of communities of practice, coaching communities of practice. Some of our colleagues are here with us today. Great to see them. But one in particular is one that formed within the past year. And our charge is to facilitate program improvement at the consortium level in a technical assistance coaching kind of way. And we pretty quickly defined our roles as helping consortia with goal setting and providing support and providing resources. We also clarified right away among ourselves that we were not engaging in compliance or policy enforcement. It was really important to make that distinction. It's been really helpful in clarifying our roles and our boundaries as well. It's allowed for a consistency of coaching that we each have with our respective coaching partners or clients or teams. And the research says that coaches need initial and ongoing professional learning. And the community of practice is a great example of that ongoing professional learning and support. We learn from each other all the time, and we do it in a very specific, explicit way. We study and learn and reflect and apply. So you and I are also doing some coaching and advising of professional learning communities as a team, a duo of coaches. And I have to say that I think that experience benefits the PLC teams a lot, simply because our two heads are better than one. and I learn so much from working with you. And in fact, I think that programs that are thinking of getting started in coaching would be really well advised to consider starting with pairs or teams of coaches rather than one individual coach, because a pair or a team can really provide that mutual support and learn together, give feedback and advice to each other. And that's a kind of on-the-job learning that is incredibly valuable and ends up benefiting everyone involved, not only the coaches, but the people with whom the coaches are working.
Thank you, Jacques. So as you've heard, Jacques and I are not only part of a coaching community of practice, but we are also a coaching team or duo. And for us, this is a definition of coaching that we like. Coaching is partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. We particularly like the words thought-provoking, creative process, and inspires. And in practice, we try not to tell our coaching partners what to do or to think, but we endeavor to ask questions and to hold a space to push the partner's thinking, to challenge assumptions, and to broaden analysis. This definition is based on inquiry and support and is not one of judgment or of fixing deficits. As part of professional learning that Jacques talked about earlier, effective coaching is sustained and embedded and is also focused and goal-driven. I just wanted to reiterate this in the definition. And then I want to talk about that when we interact with partners in ways that don't align with this definition, it's been helpful to us to acknowledge and name that. Jacques, I think you have an aha story about what coaching is and what it isn't.
Yeah, and so this, this is one of the coaching ventures that involve you and I coaching together, and we were working with a professional learning community team, and I was just getting a little confused and frustrated because I didn't think what I was doing or what we were doing was really coaching. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I think that what helped me was to realize that we were at the beginning simply responding to kind of random requests from the team. And when I realized that that's what was happening, then I thought, oh, okay, so we're not coaching yet. We're advising and we're providing resources. And as soon as I got some clarity around that, it made me feel better because, when you can name what you're doing, then you can also name what else you want to be doing. And there's so many other roles that a coach can play: a data coach, instructional coach, professional learning facilitator coach, all kinds of different roles. And I realized that the roles that we were playing were really, really narrow, and it helped us think of a strategy to grow our opportunity there. And that strategy goes back to something you just said, Sue, which is being focused and goal-driven. And we realized that we were neither, and the team we were coaching wasn't either. So when we prepared to work with them again, we prepared to help them get focused and goal-driven. They were very open to that. And I have to say that the experience since then has improved tremendously. And I think everyone involved is finding a lot more value in the time that we're spending together.
Thank you. So there are some activities that are sometimes associated with coaching, but for us are different. Jacques, can you, there we go, thanks. In contrast to our definition of coaching, which is up there in italics, in advice, an expert shares knowledge, skills, and experience. And this can be a complementary relationship between peers with different kinds of knowledge. Advising can sometimes be for the purpose of compliance also. And if it is, you can see that that does not fit into the definition of inspiring to maximize personal or professional potential. Also in contrast to our definition is mentoring, where a less experienced staff is under the care of a more senior staff. The focus of this relationship is career-related functions as well as the mentor being a role model. So not quite fitting into our definition of coaching, but to help us recognize the difference. And now we'd like some of your ideas, Jacques.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sue. So we'd like to hear from you in the chat, please, to think about when someone helped you to maximize your potential in some kind of inspiring or thought-provoking way. It could be a coach, a mentor, an advisor. If you can reflect on an experience or two that you have had that's really been of great personal or professional value to you, and then pinpoint what exactly made that experience valuable. What did the coach or mentor or advisor say or do to inspire you? What did that person say or do to help you grow towards maximizing your potential? So we're looking for examples from real life examples from your lives. So if you could share in the chat, we would appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie. Someone who believed in you, and our dear friend, Karen Barroso.
A lot of us owe a lot to Karen. Arturo, thank you. Learning new methods to deliver information. Okay, here come some examples. Carol, experience with the supervisor, inquires, asks questions, supports you. Usha, someone asked questions and made you think and pause.
Non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental, yeah.
Yes.
Nudged you to think differently. Nice. Beth, hi Beth, haven't seen you in a long time. Hope you're doing well. Coach asked a lot of questions and would let you think out loud and pushed you a tiny bit farther than you were going on your own. Yeah, that's great. All right. Let's see. Going down to Carolyn, a colleague that you looked up to as a role model began to speak to you as a mentor and made you feel recognized. Her desire to mentor you made you feel that she believed in your future. Yeah, that's so important to give people the inspiration to believe in themselves and to go on. Michelle, I said hello to you way back at the beginning. I don't think your sound was on then, but great to see you again. It's been a long time. The coach provided about 3 questions to answer prior to the meeting, read through the responses at the start, and laser focused the discussion, making sure you saw things more realistically, right? Okay. And Arturo again presented the information in a very simple way, made it so much easier to process and acquire. Great, all right. And Greg, a member of Instructional Leadership Corps, that sounds exciting, a cooperative effort between Stanford and CTA, worked with a vertical team of teachers and university staff, invaluable experience sharing, collaborating, treating each other, where did I go? As valuable partners in learning. That's great. And Karen, someone asked you if you thought about teacher training, and that got you started thinking about that. Yeah. Well, whoever asked you that question, we owe that person a great debt of gratitude too. All right.
Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences being inspired by a coach or a mentor or an advisor. So now we'll go on to types of coaching. Within the definition of coaching that we've been talking about, to help the partner achieve goals and to grow, we have found that there are many different types of coaching approaches, stances, and activities. And this afternoon, we'll talk about 3 of them. Jacques and I strive toward facilitative coaching, where we see ourselves facilitating discussions which support new ways of thinking through reflection and analysis. What does that look like? We formulate and ask strategic questions. We listen. We reflect. We spend a lot of time preparing open-ended, non-judgmental questions. And that's why Usha's comment about non-judgmental struck a note with me. Questions that clarify, explore, and probe. And the result is partners reaching their own goals and reaching their own potential. Jacques recently had a page of 16 questions prepared to ask a coaching partner. Jacques, well, you didn't use all 16 questions. Can you tell us about the discussion that the questions prompted?
Sure. Yeah, I tend to prepare for coaching sessions by preparing a list of questions after I ask myself, where does my client need to go now, and what do I need to do or say as a coach to facilitate that? So in this particular case, the original focus was really narrow and really clear. And it wasn't a full-blown coaching agreement right from the outset. It was actually a pretty narrow advising agreement. And it was for some advice around creating job descriptions. And so I asked a couple of background and context questions. And then I asked, what outcomes do you hope to see as a result of having these new positions put into place and functioning at a high level? And how would you like the 2 positions to complement each other? And then the discussion just kind of took off from there. The client began to articulate a real vision for the program. And I said to her that based on the vision I had just heard her describe, I would send her some resources so she could reference them to help continue to build the job descriptions. But then the conversation went to my asking her if the current job descriptions spell out concretely what the position's primary responsibilities and tasks are relative to the vision she articulated. And she thought about that and said, well, not clearly enough, in essence. So I asked, how could you make them, how could you edit them to make them stronger in terms of helping advance the vision? And her immediate response was to move the primary responsibilities to the top of the job description, make sure they're connected to short and long-term goals and outcomes, and maybe eliminate the tasks that seem less important. And that was, that's an example of how a conversation can start one way, and if the client is open to having thoughts being provoked can really go in another direction that ends up providing a more valuable platform to get more substantial work done. And I'll have a part 2 about this story a little bit later.
So we'll hear more about how that story evolves. We hope that that example gave you an idea of what facilitative coaching can look like. There are also times when we take a more directive or instructive approach to coaching, where we are more of an expert, where we explicitly share our knowledge, skills, and experience to help the partner grow. The result is that the partner can implement a new skill or strategy. In contrast to the facilitative approach, a more directive approach can sound like, what is another way you might do such and such? Or what do you think might happen if you did it this way? One of the things that Jacques and I are realizing is that these two types of coaching, facilitative and directive, are not antithetical, that both of these are on a continuum of coaching types. With the facilitative approach, there can be a lighter touch. And with the directive approach, the coach can be a bit more assertive. For both of these, a big part of coaching is also listening. And one of the things we do as coaches is to listen for patterns. We might hear repeated remarks and themes suggesting a partner's mindset. Sometimes the mindset can be fixed and paralyzing. When partners say things like, students always do this, or, oh, we can't do that. Robert Hargrove calls this a rut story. And a more directive approach can be useful in disrupting rut stories and changing them into river stories or to a more growth mindset, which reflects a commitment to learning and growing. And so we'll pause for a moment, and now we have a question for our webinar participants about facilitative and directive coaching approaches. Katie, if you can bring up the poll. Thank you. Imagine you are a coach. You have just helped your partner to develop a plan, and now you want to address how to monitor progress of that plan. If you wanted to take a more facilitative approach, which one of these sentence starters or statements would be most clearly facilitative, which would support new ways of thinking? The three choices are: an effective way to monitor progress is to, I'd like to suggest something. And the third choice, what evidence would be useful for monitoring progress? So if you could think about these and which one would be most clearly facilitative. Looks like we have 12 responses. Okay, so it looks like many people selected the last, what evidence would be useful for monitoring progress. And another one selected was an effective way to monitor progress is. The first two bullets are a little more assertive. You have something in mind, whereas the third is more open-ended. And so the third may be a little more facilitative. The differences here, as you can see, can be very subtle. And this is why we take care to formulate questions to get the right question and to ask it the right way. All right, so the third coaching approach that we'll talk about today is transformational coaching. Oh, I need to close my poll there. Transformational coaching attempts at a broader scope of systems thinking and seeing broader relationships and patterns. It looks for root causes, often beyond your immediate coaching partner, to the broader educational systems. And it can sometimes challenge the status quo. Jacques, can we return to your example? Part two.
Sure. So with the client I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the conversation went from talking about job descriptions to talking about what it means to structure and implement a student-centered program, because that was her clear vision. And to help her think that through, I started asking a series of what would it look like and feel like and sound like questions. So what would student-centeredness look like and feel like and sound like at intake? What would it look like and feel like and sound like at orientation, in the classroom, in the transition counselor's office, et cetera, et cetera. And each question just helped her think through more of the details that she wanted to make come to life in her program, to move it to being more of a student-centered program. And so this conversation was kind of a far leap from talking about job descriptions, but we tied it right back to the job descriptions. And eventually she decided to articulate her vision of student-centeredness at the same time she was creating the job description, so that they could inform each other. And I think the results are pretty dramatic, and she's very, very happy with the way things have turned out. But I think that's an example of how what might start off with a pretty narrow focus can open up to something more structural and systemic, and lead people to engage more in systems thinking, which gets you a little closer to that transformational kind of coaching.
Great example, thank you.
So let's give a moment here for your reflections on what you have heard in that segment about directive and facilitative and transformational coaching. If you could add your reflections to the chat, and there are some prompts there to help start the reflections if you need it. I see, I think, and I wonder. Carol, I wonder if a coach paired with someone who can guide the compliance issues will be helpful to a team, consortium, or agency. That's a great question. straddling that line between assistance that is compliance related and assistance that is growth related is a challenging thing. And I think pairing people up to address that might be an excellent solution. Yeah. And
Beth sees that there are different types of coaching for different types of scenarios. I'm glad we were able to do that. Thank you. Oh, wow, they're coming in now.
Let's see. Anthony has heard from some coaches that they have a script with prompts and sentence starters so that they make sure they are facilitating and not directing when they want to facilitate. Yes, I think what I've learned from my coaching colleagues, Anthony, is that the more we coach, the more we prepare exactly like that, because that's what makes the coaching sessions really productive. Usha says the types are situational. They are absolutely situational. They are also on a continuum. They can start in one place and end up in another place. Diana says coaching is helping the agency become self-sufficient and leads to continuous improvement. Absolutely. Karen sees usefulness in each type. Yes, as Usha said a couple of comments ago, they're situational, so you apply them as appropriate. And a good number of other great comments there too. Jamie is a life coach and has had many coaches and coaches many clients, and coaching is very powerful. It's brilliant to offer. She coaches GED students through their GED journey and coaches her staff informally. Would like to continue the conversation. Great, Jamie. I'm really happy to hear that. And we'd love to talk with you and work with you some more. A lot of great comments there. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on now. I hope we might be able to go back and check in on some of those comments as well. All right, let's look at some more types of coaching. So in addition to having a sense of what coaching approach to use in a given situation, it's important to be mindful of the differences between coaching individuals and coaching teams. There are lots of similarities. There are also some major differences. The differences have implications for coaches and teachers and administrators and programs and students. Let's take a quick look at some of the similarities and differences, and let's start with individuals. Coaching individuals allows for differentiation because everything is tailored to start where the individual is. And you can explore where the individual needs or wants to go. And the coach's sole focus is helping that individual fill the gaps that we mentioned earlier. And you can set a pace that's just right for an individual. Often getting individual coaching isn't seen as an organic part of professional learning, but instead as an intervention when someone isn't performing up to expectations. And very, very frequently, that is the reason for assigning a coach. But we would argue, based on the research and how we're now coming to define coaching, that coaching may not always be the right intervention in such cases, and maybe mentoring or advising, as Sue mentioned before, is more appropriate. We're starting to feel a little very much attached to coaching, and we think when coaching is foisted on someone, it gives coaching a bad name. That it gets perceived as fixing someone's problem or overcoming a deficit rather than helping people maximize their potential. When it's assigned to someone because of a perception of poor performance, then coaching can feel evaluative and punitive, and that is the opposite of what coaching is supposed to be. So I think in our programs, we really need to be careful if we're going to institute some coaching structures to differentiate between coaching and helping someone whose performance needs a little polishing. When you're coaching teams, the dynamics shift. You are coaching collaboration as opposed to coaching an individual. And you're coaching towards a very specific goal that the team is collaborating on. There's sort of a built-in focus if the team, hopefully, is focused. So it's really important in these situations for coaches to be aware of facilitation strategies, for example, that really help with efficient and effective collaboration so that people get results in ways that are supported by good processes along the way. It's also different because it can, in a lot of situations, increase the group's willingness to take some risks, to explore new and different ways of doing things. When an individual does that, that individual might feel like the spotlight is shining a little too brightly on a single person. Whereas in a group, everyone knows that it's a group effort, and it just lowers the anxiety level about trying new things, growing, and expanding. Sue, you've coached individuals and teams. In what ways have you found the experiences similar or different? And what are you learning about your own coaching from both types of experiences?
Oops, there we go. As these slides indicate, coaching teams is more than just magnifying what coaching individuals is. And when I first started coaching teams, I hadn't realized that a part of the coach's work is also in the realm of collaboration, team building, and group dynamics, how they're going to reach their goals together. And going back to our discussion of common expectations, I wonder if our coaching partners also realize this difference. If a team is being coached, if they wonder, if they realize that, oh, part of the bargain is also team building. I don't think that as a field, we've had those discussions yet.
Yeah. So looking at skills that the coach should have, these are the kinds of skills that we've been talking about already a little bit that are needed for coaching individuals. For coaching with teams, you need all of those skills plus these, which we've just touched on in Sue's example, and a little bit of what I said before when we were looking at the differences that come out when you're coaching teams. These are really, really important skills that I think we are continuing to develop ourselves and learning through the experience of applying them. So I'll leave you with this quote for a second. You can read it for yourself, of course. But I think it's quite an argument for us in adult ed with our limited resources to really think in terms of coaching teams. I just think, you know, we get more bang for our buck if we're coaching teams, and it helps put the coaching culture more deeply into programs. If more people are participating rather than individuals, then it really starts to take root. Let's see. In light of the fact that so many schools have professional learning communities now, coaching seems particularly essential. If you've ever gone to a PLC training and returned to your sites to try to implement an authentic PLC, you know how challenging that can be. It's relatively easy to get started and really difficult to stay on track and to keep it going. The explosion of PLCs in schools really cries out for site-based embedded coaching support. And since PLCs are supposed to be forever, it seems to only make sense for coaching to be a fully integrated part of it, and help create coaching cultures in schools and programs. So if a program really wants to focus on learning rather than limiting the focus to teaching, a good PLC coach can really be instrumental in making that process come to life. So,
Jacques, in the interest of time, I'm wondering if participants can think about this, and in your final reflection at the end of the webinar to include this. So in what you've just heard, what are some revelations, some affirmations, and some questions that you might have? So as a time check, we were hoping to conclude this webinar at 2:15. So we'll go on the fast track here. And if you need to leave, we understand. But if you can hang with us, we appreciate that. So a brief overview of the coaching process, the cycle, and we'll talk more about this in webinar 2 in January. Foundation of coaching, as you all realize, is relationship building and building trust. Elena Aguilar says, without trust, there can be no coaching. Moving on to preparation and exploration, the coaching process has a better chance of being successful when both partners are prepared and ready for coaching. I had an example which I'll skip over. Again, we'll talk more about preparation and exploration in part 2. Goal setting. We've said that coaching is focused, and that involves goal setting. I think you're all familiar with SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. And we think that the narrower the goal, the better. And the coaching partners then create a work plan to reach those SMART goals. And the plan becomes a structure that holds the conversation, holds the questions and the activities that make up coaching. And then there are the coaching activities and regular coaching conversations. What I mean here is regularly scheduled. And it's through these activities and coaching conversations that the coaching partners better understand their situation and context. They explore challenges and create new practices. And lastly, reflection. Jacques and I are trying to embed reflection into our practice. And in coaching, reflection can be done by both sets of partners, together and individually. It can take place at the end of meetings, mid-cycle, at the end of cycle, but it should happen. And it's also a time to look back at your accomplishments, to celebrate them, and then to determine next steps. Before we conclude this coaching process discussion, I'd like to say that, to share some of the feedback that we have gotten from our partners. They say that they appreciate this coaching process because it meets them where they are. And I think you've heard throughout today that is, it's not a cookie cutter situation, but helping each individual person or team to reach their potential. So in wrapping up, let's visit the objectives. We hope that we've met the objectives of about the power of coaching, research, foundations and types of coaching. And we hope you'll let us know about reaching these objectives in the evaluation at the end of the webinar. For our own reflection, we'd like to return to our motivation for the series. Well, we all have different coaching experiences. We hope that this is the beginning of coaching conversations in adult ed toward becoming better prepared, more consistent in providing quality service to the field. And we want to thank CalPro for supporting coaching capacity with this webinar. And now we'd like to give you a chance to reflect on today's webinar. Here are some questions to prompt you. What resonated for you in today's, different questions. So I'll just give you some prompting questions. What resonated for you in today's session? What challenges or confirmations came out of today's session? And what reflections or questions do you now have? So while you're doing that, here are some resources. Our purpose today was to start a conversation about coaching foundations and supporting coaching foundations. Here are some resources, particularly for those interested in becoming and developing as coaches. The Art of Coaching provides a foundation for many kinds of coaching situations, teachers, with administrators, with teams. If you're coaching professional learning communities, PLCs, Amplify Your Impact is a rich resource which specifically addresses coaching PLCs. And perhaps you are asking yourselves these questions. And if so, we hope you'll join us back to this space for webinar 2 in January, where we will address them. We'll take a systems point of view that will be particularly applicable for administrators, coordinators, and anyone interested in learning about the leadership role in coaching. So please take some time to give us some of your reflections for today, what you've learned, what some of your questions are. Thank you, Vicki, for putting the webinar evaluation link in the chat. And one of the first questions is what kind of webinar this is. And this is a research webinar. And Jen, just thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope that we've piqued your interest in coaching. And we wish you the best in your journey.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thanks for your enthusiasm about coaching too. We hope this is the start of something big.